That's the house sparrow Passer domesticus bringing us in for the 10th episode of Dissectify. Welcome to the Dissectify podcast, the show that gets you curious about the wild world right outside your window. I'm your host, Nicholas Sines, bringing you content hopefully every Tuesday night. I've missed a couple, not gonna lie. I was busy, there's holidays. That's about all the explanation I'm gonna give. Hope you guys had a good holidays. I love New Year's. I don't know about you guys. I was having some trouble thinking up what I should talk about this episode. And I think what I'm going to focus on is humans and interaction with nature. Because it's kind of a conflicting subject, for me at least. I see that a lot of really knowledgeable people who are trying to do good conservation work are really focused on preserving habitat, which is fundamental, right? Living things need space to survive and eat and gather resources. They need it. Like, that's not optional, it's required. So that is probably the most important step for conservation. But I think there is a second layer that a lot of people or a lot of efforts kind of leave behind, and that's trying to get good engagement between people and nature. And I think it's hard because there's so much accidental damage that can actually happen just by people being there. And that makes it hard. One of the goals of Dissectify has been trying to promote interaction with nature and help people figure out that there's a whole lot of living things going on right next to them. But yeah, I think it's hard because if you promote nature and people get really excited about it, they're gonna want to, not everybody, but you'll have people going out and taking pictures or traveling a really far distance to get a good picture of some rare bird, and they'll harass the animal to try to get the picture that they were hoping for, and that's not good. So yeah, there's this weird balance of you want people to be interested and curious and excited about nature, but then all of these bad behaviors start popping out. Something like poaching rare, or poaching wild plants, literally digging them out of the soil because you want that plant. And maybe one isn't going to break things, but chances are it's not just one person who's doing this thing. If there becomes a market for, if there's enough people who want a specific rare plant or cactus or animal even, and they're willing to pay for it, somebody might just go out and start digging them out of the ground, right? And can have serious negative impacts. It can be really bad for conservation. And so I think there are some techniques that you can use to mitigate that, but it just seems like there should be ways to try to deal with those things, but I think it's really important that people find a reason to care about nature. And I think it's hard to do that if your experience with nature is only through the TV, or you have these big conservation efforts going on and they're doing really great work, but then they're also, in the process of doing that work, they're telling literally everybody, stay out, right? We're protecting this habitat, and I think it's good to have protected areas, and in fact it's probably needed. So maybe I should do my research. Maybe there isn't enough habitat still being preserved and blocked away from human activity. But the whole approach, while it may be necessary, I think it's missing an important part where you want people to care. And because that's the way you're going to get actually funding conservation efforts. It's how you're going to get donations to conservation nonprofits. That's how you're going to get people to be willing to change up their yards, right? If it's a dead like everybody's yard in America is not serving as a natural habitat for anything in the United States. So that's how you're going to get those changes, I think, is really helping people get involved and like explore and see the things for themselves and figure out this is something I care about, and they're going to want to protect it. But I think, like I was saying, if you get people excited about nature, there's going to be somebody willing to try to make money off of that in a very negative way. So it's a balance. I don't know. I think it's hard to draw that line. I think it's fine to go somewhere and see animals. It's kind of like if you go diving, right? You'll run into wild animals. Like, it'll happen. And I think the general rule is that the wildlife is allowed to approach you, but you are not allowed to approach the wildlife. Which seems kind of silly, but with a rule like that, you're preventing large groups of people from chasing down animals in their natural habitat and probably causing stress. Whereas, even though it may sound like a silly rule, you're then preventing that sort of behavior or removing most of it. And then also you can have somebody in there exploring, like diving, going through the marine ecosystem and seeing all this beautiful stuff, and you just kind of go on your way and try not to pursue or harass other living things. Yeah, and I think that's kind of where it gets tough, right? You have like the conservation side of things where you're saying this is important, humans tend to cause issues, or they might get hurt. That is, that is a risk. You go on to like a beach with elephant seals because you want a picture. They're probably not going to know or care that you're there to just get a picture, right? They're probably going to get defensive or aggressive or whatever. They don't know why you're there. You're there to hurt them or their offspring, or they just don't want you there. Anyways, you have like these two, basically many areas where you have some people saying humans are a part of nature and we are. But we've done a really good job of removing ourselves from things like disease, malnutrition, and predation, right? We've have a history of removing all the big predators around ourselves. We develop medicine, we develop agriculture, and now we have large areas where we're growing our own food, probably at the expense of living space for other things. And I'm not saying that should stop, right? I like eating, I like being healthy, I like not running into a large predator every day. And I think that's important for basically everybody. Nobody wants those things to go away. I'm sure maybe there's somebody, but the vast majority of people like those things. I like those things, but here's the issue. We do, just like everything else, we need space, we carve out that space. But, so we're causing issues. We introduce invasive species, we take up space, we like decimate things like the bison, right? They were an issue, they were hunted for sport in like a horrendous way. They're just gone, pretty much. And there's like some pictures that are just like mountains of their skulls. Back in like the 1800s, I think, when they were just kind of shooting them whenever they could. But you have all these approaches where you say like people are a part of nature, but we do a really good job of removing ourselves in some aspects. And that's not going to change. I don't want it to change. And we are still a part of nature. We've like built up barriers, but there's no getting around it, right? Things like COVID, it's going to happen. If you go out on a hike, you might run into a bear or a mountain lion. Doesn't mean they should be gone. It just means that there's going to be a risk to us of running into one. But what do you do when you have conservation efforts saying we need to preserve this habitat, lock it away from humans, and everything's driven by like money, which seems to be like generally maybe the best system we seem to have for making sure we're like allocating resources. That's like a different podcast episode altogether. That seems to be breaking down a little bit, but it's still a system that seems to work wherever there's value, things get allocated. There's some, it works generally. But it's hard when you have nature there and you want people to appreciate it, and it needs to be protected somewhat from humans because all the incentives are you either want to exploit or take in order to make money based on nature. There's the things like you have forced interactions with animals that are kind of captive to humans, and like maybe that's not bad to some degree, right? Like a zoo, you have somewhat of an animal ambassador there. People get to interact and see that it exists and they care, and that translates to money for conservation. But then there's a lot of stuff that seems really really exploiting, where you're like handing these animals literally over to like many people every day to be like handled and interacted with because those people are willing to pay for that interaction. So, it's like, where do you draw the line? And I think my answer to this question is generally that you can help people learn through like digital media, but I think that doesn't really work as well as actually seeing nature in person. So, like, what are your options there? Like I've said, I think you can kind of give some of that habitat back. You have control if you own land or a house, or have say in what plants are getting planted outside of your workplace or a school or your church or whatever. You can pick native plants to kind of give things more space, more resources to have, and then you'll get to benefit from seeing actual, genuine local ecosystem interactions like right outside of your door. And I think that's a really good approach. And I think ecotourism done well is also a good approach. It gets kind of tricky there because, obviously if you have everybody traveling and flying all the time, maybe there's an impact there, but there's travel for everything. So I feel like if you have people traveling to see native habitats and wild things, I think in the grand scheme of things, that is not the worst. And I'm sure there's many people who disagree with that. But I think it's just not realistic to expect people to not want to do these things and to travel and to see different habitats and wild animals there doing their thing. And there are issues, right? You can have too much traffic, you can have invasive species or whatever, you can even have people like picking things to like move elsewhere, hence invasive species, or like animal trafficking or some stuff like that. But there will always be people who do things that are not great. But it seems like it's really a good way to give resources to allow people to see like actual wildlife interactions, and then those resources that they use to get there then can get dispersed to local areas that might otherwise have to turn to more destructive ways of making money, like logging or farming in places that are really, really kind of like destroying habitat just for people to make a living. So I think this is a good way to mitigate that, and then also you're fostering interest for the people who want to do these things and explore, and you're also giving incentives for locals in other parts of the world that otherwise might need to do something else to support themselves. I don't think they're evil people. I think it's just kind of how it is. If you need money to live, and that's all you have is the offer of some logging company coming in and saying, you have all this land, we want the wood, and then you've cut down a forest that's been there for like 200 years or something, then you have this issue of like succession, like plant succession, you're going to get like these really fast growing grasses and whatever else, when really you've exchanged a habitat that took a very long time to grow for something that just does not serve the same purpose. So I guess this is sort of what's been on my mind. Like, it seems like many conservation efforts, even though they may seem large, I'm not sure that it's enough in its scale, but also I'm not sure that it's alone. I don't think it's the only, like, it won't work alone, because if you don't let people into these spots or observe or somehow interact and like gain the experience of thinking it's valuable, then like you're losing the actual fuel that will help change things. And you're always going to have new people who will then need the opportunity to see these things are valuable. And again, I think there's a gradient there. There's a scale. I don't think you want to do things in a way that's like doing minimal impact and like allowing people to get these experiences. But I was recently talking, so I had this experience of going abroad because I wanted to do a trip. I wanted to see a rainforest, like all my life. I was into zoo books, into animals, reading about them, learning about them, and getting really excited, right? And I never grew out of that. But so it was always a big thing for me. I grew up in like Western US and like fairly like, I don't know, I'd say like kind of scrubland, like deserty areas, like juniper tree sort of a thing. Think like tumbleweeds, not like hardcore desert. But so that's sort of what I grew up in, and I always wanted to be like, I want to see all these animals, right? I think they're amazing. I think they're beautiful. And to me, the rainforest is like the opposite end. It seemed like otherworldly to me. So it was always a goal, and at some point I was just like, well, I think I have the means to do this, so why not actually just like book a trip and get it done? And I found this company that in the area, I guess I could talk about where it was. It was Costa Rica was where I ended up going. I think it's a really great country to like kind of get your feet wet. Like a lot of their industry is really around ecotourism and using that to like support the local economy in it. And I've recently started talking to the company again that I had booked that original trip through. And it was great. I got to see like a lot of the major animals that you would want to see. You got to see sloths and mountain lions and its cubs, and some monkeys, howler and capuchin and squirrel monkeys, and got to see an American crocodile, I think, which was really cool. I'd like to see one a little more up close, not too up close, but it was massive. And they had this one river. I think their most famous national park is called Corcovado, and I'm still convinced the coldest showers in the world are at Corcovado, at the Serena station at Corcovado. It's kind of funny. You'd hear like, they have like their stalls or whatever for showers because it's hot and humid, and you've been hiking around and stuff like that, and you go to take a shower and you can hear like people randomly just like yelling out in a start because like there's only one knob and it's cold as shit. But yeah, it was a cool experience. I got to see a lot of cool things, and I think more importantly, right? I mean, so like I got to see cool things, and I got to get that perspective, and I can keep those experiences with me, but they did it in a really cool way too. There was like multiple instances where they tell you like, you get to see like the actual dividing lines in parts of the rainforest where you have like old growth to like medium growth to new growth because things had been logged out. And I may have an episode coming up sooner talking with the owner of this company, who's a really cool person. But he actually kind of Well, let me backtrack a little bit. So yeah, there may be an episode coming up with him, but there were multiple instances, right, where you got to see the impacts that like human industry had on these things. And if you ever go there, I won't mention some of the more niche stuff because I think it's kind of cool to see if you ever go there for yourself. But yeah, there's like this one tree that has white, like bleeds white sap. It might be latex. Don't quote me on that, but it like has some white liquid in it. When you like, if you cut the bark, it'll start leaking this liquid, and so it's kind of famous for that. So when our tour guide takes us around there, you have this really big, beautiful, massive tree, but then you have like all over the trunk up to about 6 or so feet down, you have like different symbols and like people's initials and things carved into the bark because they wanted to see this sap leak out of the tree. And the guide was like, telling us, you want to be respectful, don't do things like this, because, it's, I think everybody thinks it's like a small and negative thing, or maybe it's bad enough that one more won't hurt, but it's just not great. Like, I think that is the negative side effect of when you have this interest. People think these small negative things aren't a big deal, but remember, like, if you are there doing these things, you're kind of like a part of a flow of people. And if all of these people choose to do the same negative things, it has a real impact. And so yeah, this tree was just like all scarred up, like all around the base of this tree, because everybody wanted like to see or picture the same thing. And I kind of get it, right? Like if you've traveled halfway around the world or something, and seeing this tree was like a major part for you, you're like, oh, what's the big deal if I cut the bark? But like, I don't know. It's just not great. Like, point being, I thought it was really good the way they handled these things. They showed us the impacts. They showed us the beauty, but they also showed us the reasons why it's important to be respectful and understand the impacts that humans have on this sort of a place. Yeah. I mean, it was a really cool experience, but I just liked how they handled it. And I'll try to have that episode coming up at some point. I'll mention the company name and everything. Again, right, this podcast is Dissectify. If you end up deciding to try to check out some of the information we have, I put a lot of effort and continue to put a lot of effort into a website, dissectify.com, to try to give you guys information and tools and resources, some of which is like affiliate ecotourism style, like traveling things, because I think if it's done well, it's a good way to foster interest and allow people to see these places that they wouldn't normally be able to see, also not having a major impact, or even to see the things that, to see and start to care about the things that may become impacted because of how we choose to handle our human stuff, It's kind of tough. In order to be able to do things and sustain a project, you need money, even if you're a nonprofit, it's donations. If you're a company, it's sales or services or whatever else. But maybe this is a good point for the nature tip of the day. I think I'm just going to get redundant. You just got to get outside. Just like, if you have like a sunny day, just like go out, like go to a local trail or go to a park, and then just like start listening for birds, start looking around flowers for bugs, if you do decide to flip over a rock, make sure you're not going to crush anybody when you put it back. And then if you decide to go really far, maybe let somebody know where you're going, have the logistics ready, have the water, especially water, have food, have backup plans for a flat tire. Yeah, have a good way to get back. Be safe about it. It's like I said, nature's beautiful, not necessarily always nice. And I think some people might have issues with me saying, oh, nature's just beautiful. And that's true, it's not just beautiful. I think it's necessary, right? Can you imagine living in a world where there is no other things, it's just humans and maybe some way that we've worked out how to survive with food and water and medicine? Like, I don't think that's a world anybody wants to live in, really. Like, it gives us context. It reminds us that there are other things there. It allows us to live. In some cases, it also tries to kill us, but that's how it goes sometimes, you know? So, I guess let's start wrapping up the episode with a biota beat. I wanted to talk about one of my, favorite animals, but there's a fish called the ghost fish that's part of the family Caniscifidae that exists in the southern oceans of the freezing southern oceans of the planet, called the crocodile ice fish. And they have this weird look about them. They're like totally white, meaning like their gills aren't red. Their gills don't even have hemoglobin. So the things that every vertebrate uses to get oxygen to where it needs to go and to allow cell processes to happen and food to get, energy to be produced is not present in these fish. And you'd think like, well, how do they survive, right? Do they have different biochemistry? I'm sure there's some variation in the biochemistry of this fish, but really, they just don't have the need for hemoglobin, right? It is redundant in where it lives. So it costs energy to be making these red blood cells, red blood cells, that have hemoglobin. But instead of putting all the work into making that protein that's going to help grab oxygen and push it around the body, they just have like translucent blood. They thought it was an example of disadaptation, so they were unadapting. Like they were losing features due to some genetic issue. And typically this would have been lethal, but in the area that they live in, right, the oxygen content in the water was high enough that they actually didn't need this hemoglobin in order to get the oxygen in their blood and around their body and where it needed to go. So about 25 million years ago, an opening in the Drake Passage isolated Antarctica, creating an Antarctic circumpolar current. This trapped the continent in a cooling loop, and by 15 million years ago, the ocean reached freezing temperature. And most native fish went extinct due to the cold, leaving an ecological void for ancestors of the ice fish. But there's multiple things here. So it's not just the loss of blood pigment. When this circumpolar region was happening and the cold just kind of stays there and it prevents heat from coming in, you have like this increasing coldness of the environment around the South Pole. So there's not just the hemoglobin aspect, there's also the freezing issue, right? If you are an animal and you freeze, typically the ice kind of like bursts your cells, basically. Like ice tends to be spiky and sharp and it expands, so it kind of like rips things up a little bit. And scientists have looked at this fish and they found the antifreeze gene evolved from a digestive enzyme, pancreatic trypsinogen, which I don't know what that is, but that's where it came from. Through a process called adsorption inhibition, these proteins bind to ice crystals entering the fish. So right, you're in an environment that's cold enough, you're in liquid, but you still have some ice kind of floating around. And it's in your body, or maybe like kind of forming, you're getting too cold. And these proteins bind to the ice crystals, prevent it from growing. But since cold water holds much more dissolved oxygen than warm water, they're able to kind of live this sedentary lifestyle and allow this typically fatal mutation to just happen and exist because the cost of hemoglobin no longer needs to be paid in order to build it constantly, and they can get by without it. So there's, interestingly, multiple species in this area have had the same thing, the same effect, the loss of hemoglobin. But in this particular fish, there's also this interesting body rearrangement to the typical structures found in other fish. So some of those include massive hearts. Their hearts are huge and spongy to maximize diffusion. They have 2 to 4 times the blood volume of a normal fish, and they have large bore capillaries to really allow low pressure, low resistance to liquid flows. So having larger capillaries around their body really allows easy flow of that blood and therefore the oxygenation around the body. So despite these seemingly handicaps that they can get by with, they have diets ranging from krill to sometimes being an ambush predator. They get by and they do well. They're scaleless, they absorb more oxygen that way. But also at some point there was an area in the Weddell Sea that had apparently 60 million nests, and they found these fish acting as fairly devoted parents, fanning the eggs for months, moving this oxygen-rich water over the eggs to ensure oxygenation and allow those eggs to hatch. And unfortunately, this adaptation that allowed them to be successful in this environment may be at a serious disadvantage now as things start to warm. This adaptation is not cutting it anymore, right? Things warm up, oxygen lowers, they are going to struggle to get what they need, but they are very specific to their environment and it's changing. And on that happy note, maybe I'll give it a little switch up here. I will say thank you for listening. I've been trying to put a lot of effort into providing information and tools and services for people on dissectify.com. So please leave a review wherever you're listening. Visit dissectify.com for more nature exploring tools. My Instagram @nicholas.signs can also be found there. Tag me in your nature photos. I'd love to see them. And so far, there haven't been any. As of 1/20/26, none received so far. But remember, you live in a world with so many other species, so get out there and check it out. Thanks.